Open the RAC meeting 8. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Just as a reminder, as folks are joining, change your name and affiliation in Zoom. Give a couple minutes for folks to make their way into the room. Good to see folks. Welcome, welcome. Just letting folks make their way in, and then we'll get started. Again, as folks join, since the last time I said this, reminder to change your name and affiliation in Zoom. Hover over your square, click on the ellipses, rename. We have one more minute. We got a bunch of people already in the room, so give one more minute, and then we'll dive in, get started. Okay, well, we'll make our way in. So welcome, folks, to the 8th meeting of our Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Just as a reminder for folks who haven't already done so, if folks can change their name and affiliation in Zoom, that'll be really helpful. Some other reminders, this meeting is live streamed and recorded. We also have closed caption available. If you click likely on the more button, depending on how your Zoom screen looks, you click on more and then scroll up to captions. That's helpful for your participation. Let's do, before we get started, we'll do our first roll call, and then I'll just ask for my colleagues to help track as folks join post roll call. So we'll go in order. Let's see, Alan Lazo. Alan Hines.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Adam Molina. Ann Kelly. I see you, Ann.
Here.
Thank you. Alexandra Rain. Oh, Alexandra, I see you there. Thank you. Ben Gerwitz.
Here.
Thank you, Ben. Beth Barker Hidalgo. Was that Beth? Yes. Okay. Brandon Persinger. Brandon Trader. Brian Rankin.
Good morning, folks.
Thank you, Brian. Brock, I see you off mute. Hello. Morning. Cassara Phillips.
Here.
Thank you. Chantel Levenso.
Good morning. Here.
Morning. Corey Harlan.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Dana Hicks. David Madison. Alyssa Gertler.
Hi there, I'm here.
Thank you. And Anna Molina, I saw you join. Garrett Pryor, welcome. Garrett Stevenson. Gloria Sandoval. Come on, geez. Holly Kurtz. Jessica Blakely. And so it's got to break the streak here. Jim Johnson. Julia, I thought I saw you come in. Julia Metz.
Yeah, I can break the streak. I'm here. Good morning.
There we go. All right. The Jays, representing the Jays. Callie Glenn. I know Kathy couldn't be here. Sam Goldberg. I'll keep an eye out. Kelly Hart. Kim McCarty.
Here.
Thanks, Kim. Lindsay Hutchinson.
Good morning.
Morning. Lucia Ramirez.
Good morning.
Morning, Lucia. Mac Cunningham.
Hello, good morning.
Thanks, Mac. Mary Kyle McCurdy. I saw you out there.
Yep, good morning.
Good morning. Megan Bolton.
Morning.
Morning. Mercedes Elizalde.
Good morning. I'm here.
Morning. Michael Rock. Miranda Bateshell. Trisha Diefendorfer. I see you there, Trisha. Thank you. Rachel Moribito.
Morning.
Morning. Ryan Vandenhoef. Richard Rogers.
Here.
Thank you, Richard. Samantha Barry. Sean Hobbs Waters. Shane Kwiatkowski. Shane, I saw you out there somewhere.
Yep, good morning, present.
Morning. Shannon Vilhauer. Saw you somewhere, Shannon.
Here, thanks.
Thank you. Ted Reed. Tara Wilcoxon.
Good morning.
Morning. Victor Saldana.
Good morning.
Thank you. Anybody that I missed that joined after the alphabetical?
Oh, I did. Anna Molina.
Yep. Thanks, Anna. Good morning. Anybody else that we missed first round here? Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Good to see the folks that are here. We'll introduce folks as they come in. And then just team, making sure that before we dive into the agenda, can we get a confirmation on the YouTube stream?
It's working, Ben, albeit with the wrong title, but it is working.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's move into the agenda. So just did our welcome overview. We'll spend a bit more time both on reintroducing folks to the racial equity framework and its application to the conversation we're having. And then Shane's done some background work with community and conversations that we want to provide some space to reflect on. And again, to help us, again, really not just embrace, but to incorporate the reflections from community perspectives into the conversations that we have as these rules continue to be refined and developed. We'll get an update on the work of the Housing Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time together today kind of on the next steps of reviewing and discussion of draft rules. We'll build a break into that space, offer some time for overall reflection as well from you all, and then we'll provide some closing next steps, key dates that'll be coming up soon. So just as a reminder, if we go next slide, and 8 meetings in, I've been really pleased with the way that we've continued to engage with each other. But as a reminder, really investing in the idea that we're seeking to learn and understand from each other's perspectives, that we maintain the respectful, candid, and constructive conversations, right? The role that you all have as an advisory body to DLCD to ensure that you're giving your best expertise and wisdom where we find them, and where we can explore the resolution of differences and the opportunities to find common ground. We should seek and continue to do that. Being able to bring it into the space, right? So discussing topics together, discussing topics, as a group versus then in isolation. And of course, we've gone through a lot of this process. Hopefully folks have continued to kind of raise the issues and concerns that you've had early. But of course, always trying to avoid surprises. And then I'll just remind folks, as we We do have a chat function that is open. Ensure that it's to everyone to make sure our public can see chats as they happen, and then just be mindful of etiquette. Again, we want to bring things into the room for conversation and not use chat as a way to have a virtual side conversation. So again, just 8 meetings in, y'all have done a great job of aligning with these guidelines as we've gone through the work. So with that, I'll pass it to Ethan to really get us motivated this morning.
Thanks, Ben, and hi everyone. I'm so glad to be with you today. Thanks for joining on a Monday early. Appreciate that. For the record, my name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I'm the manager of the Housing Division at the Department of Land Conservation Development. We're here at RAC meeting number 8, which is a good spot as any to continue talking about the rulemaking and really where we've been and how we've gotten to this point. Really, because this meeting we're coming down to the end of this rulemaking process, especially for 2/3 of this rulemaking related to the needs in production and the housing acceleration rules. And so today, really the focus is going to be on those 2 sections of rules. We'll hear an update from the capacity and urbanization work, of course, but we're really honing in on the final elements, the final pieces of those rules in advance of a Land Conservation Development Commission public hearing on those 2 sets of rules on the 25th of this month. So yeah, if we go to the next slide, let's kind of talk through some of those major milestones and those key dates that are coming very, very quickly here. So obviously we're meeting today on the 7th of October to talk through what we call version 3.0 of the rules. So the 3rd iteration, the 3rd draft of the rules that was published in the Secretary of State's notice on the 1st of October. All of that is leading towards an October 25th Land Conservation and Development Commission public hearing where any of you all or your colleagues or your coworkers or other interested parties can come and provide public comment to the Land Conservation Development Commission as they consider your public testimony and your public comments in the adoption of those rules, those 2 sets of rules at their meeting on December 5th and 6th. We haven't nailed down the actual date of when our agenda item will land on their 2-day meeting, but it'll be within those times. We'll have one more opportunity to come together as a rulemaking advisory committee after that public hearing on the 25th. On November 6th, we'll have our 9th rulemaking advisory committee. And really, that's kind of like a cleanup meeting where we're having discussions about really those last handful or couple outstanding items as we're moving into that adoption hearing on December 5th. And then I do want to add actually one thing here, which is not on this list, but is the close of the public comment period on the rules, which closes midnight of November 14th, so Thursday. At the close of that public comment period, DLCD goes into full-on refinement and crafting of the final rules so that the commission has a clean set of rules to adopt when they meet on the 5th and 6th of December. So that's a date to highlight on your calendars to get those final comments back to DLCD by the close of the day on the 14th of November. And then we'll move after the adoption of needs and production and the housing acceleration rules. The work continues, right? This work for the capacity and urbanization work, some of the items that this rulemaking advisory committee will be working on in 2025 need to continue to happen. And so in order to kind of launch ourselves into 2025 on a good foot and a good solid understanding of where we're going, I've actually asked you all to join us on a new meeting that we've scheduled for December 9th. It'll be our 10th rulemaking advisory committee. That'll be post-adoption of those 2 sets of rules. We can really send our eye towards 2025 capacity and urbanization and the work related to safe harbors guidance and those kind of items. So those are the key milestones. Obviously, the rules that the commission adopts in early December will be effective January 1st, 2025. That's really the big date of all of the ONA paradigm. That's really day one of ONA. So yet another big milestone on the horizon. So those are our upcoming milestones. I think now is the right time to hand this off to Anita to talk through our racial equity framework for decision making.
Thanks, Ethan. Good morning, everybody. Anita Keilani Yap, she, they pronouns. I am with Multicultural Collaborative, supporting the Rules Advisory Committee as your equity advisor. It's really great to see you all, and I really appreciate all the work you've put in so far. So this has been really great. The next slide, does it have the 8 kind of, yeah. So again, to remind you of the kind of categories of the racial equity framework that the LCDC Commission has asked DLCD staff to review. You have seen the work that they've done in previous packets and also the racial equity analysis as well. So I have to say DLCD is really a leader in the state on addressing these issues. This is so important. What I'd like to also frame up is that Thea and I and Shane Kwiatkowski, who is one of your RAC members, held a focus group. It was the week before last. And again, as part of understanding how these rules impact folks, and especially the equitable component, we had some really great conversations that Shane is going to present from the focus groups. And what I want to point out for all of you, folks in local government and also affordable housing developers and advocates, is like housing production is just one part of it. And so this part of discussion is really powerful, I just want to say, and talks about the people that it impacts mostly. And I think there are components in here that we'd like to discuss about how this can access it and get in, and talking about some of the challenges is super important. And so we'll talk a little bit about that after Shane gives her presentation. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Shane.
Great. Thank you so much, Anita. Can everyone hear me fine? Okay, cool. So I really appreciate your time that you're giving to me. I am setting my stopwatch because I am mindful of all the things we must accomplish. Okay, so let's see. In general, I guess the way that I could frame the conversation is that I came from a perspective, I was invited by the ONA to do a focus group. I was excited to do so. And so they were looking for anyone who had multiple marginalizations of lived experience, low-income renting, essentially anyone who is in the intersections of the crosshairs of the intersections in terms of inequity that happens with lack of housing equity. I decided to go not just focusing on a couple of people I know in my community, but I just did a call out for people who just had those identifications and they responded to me. I'm grateful we were able to compensate them. That is something I would like to verbalize. So I'm show gratitude to the ONA and the Multicultural Collaborative, because that is an important part, because most of these, essentially all these people were low income renters to one degree or another. Also, majority of the community, the 6 people that were able to participate were of the LGBTQ community, trans, non-binary. About half were POC, and all were low-income renters, and all have experienced housing instability within Oregon within the last 3 to 10 years. So that's the frame of who we were talking with. And then as far as what I was framing for, I was deciding fair housing and the contextualized housing need is the most important. I wanted to ask people who are Oregonians, salt of the earth, on the ground, what they feel in terms of our definitions of approaching fair housing. And then also, sorry, people of color. My apologies. There's so many acronyms. POC, people of color. So it was the fair housing and the contextualized housing need. And that's why I decided to approach for those questions. So to begin with, I think it's a relatively short discussion for the fair housing definitions. By and large, the group really decided or felt that our definitions are relatively complete. This includes in terms of communities that must be included, past harms. Not a lot of people had a lot of things to add in addition to that. It was more so a nuance specifically around the definition of affordability. Obviously, because of our other plans for the ONA, we know that we're going to provide with 0 to, median MFI, median family income. But for a lot of people, they look at affordability and they are deeply suspicious of that, not just because of the usage of the phrasing and words, but they just literally cannot afford it with the income that they describe. Once we went out from the fair housing definition, I guess the first place that I could do as far as a breakdown is the most important takeaway for me to begin with, because I'd rather start with the bad and end with the good, is that people feel such a level of despair and lack of hope or optimism that it is not just their lived experiences or their lives that are being cut short, it is their imaginations and it is their trust in other community members that they see on a day-to-day basis, as well as governmental bodies and organizing municipalities and regions. There was also just a sense of despair when it came to the fact that, by and large, in the Northwest, we love to pat ourselves on the back when it comes to acceptance of the LGBTQ community. A lot of people who are trans who come here must stay in poverty to qualify for OHP to get transitional health care. What this means is our system ends up creating a function where anyone who ends up moving here who needs transitional healthcare, gender-related resources is on average going to be doubly affected by poverty. This, of course, ends up going into a relationship of instability and very little housing choice. This also relates to topology, for an example. A lot of people say, I'd like to live by myself, but I also need to depend on housemates. And there's the idea that though we define the ideal definitions of equity and inclusion, that is the words that hang around in the air. And then there's life on the ground. And there are the humans that we have to interact with. And there's the landlords that we need to not act too different around. There are all these ways that if there's no accountability practices and if there's no ethical transparency in terms of the relationship between marginalized people and their day-to-day lived experiences of whom they live with, the neighborhoods they're in, and the authorities that they have to deal with in terms of their jobs and their landlords, it doesn't matter if we have rainbow pride flags everywhere. We do not have material conditions to plant the seeds of safe trans and queerness for many people in the city. And that was sad. And specifically the despair when I was trying to go for an optimistic standpoint where I think of doom and gloom. I think of my trauma related to housing. I relate to them. And then I had a question. What is your highest and most idealized form of imagination to have housing? For me, I'd want a clawfoot tub and a bedroom, blah, 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 whatever I describe. Everyone's description of what they wanted was exceedingly modest and humble. The amount of humility expressed in people who consistently understand that there are not complete housing opportunities for them, and they see the paradox of constantly being displaced while they meet people who have enough income and resources to live stably in beautiful neighborhoods that they must transit through and work in, correct? So there ends up being a resonance of, yes, there are options for people, life will still continue, but how often must I change and lose my life again and again? What trauma must I suffer and what loss must I bear? And what community must I try to forge when I literally don't feel safe necessarily with housemates? Or when it comes to a mental illness and trauma aspect, this is something we don't talk about in society. When they say keep Portland weird, that also includes neurodivergence and it includes trauma and includes people who are emotionally very deeply hurt. So they ended up stating, if I had choice of an SRO or a studio that really met my needs, maybe, but then, and I wouldn't have to live with people. But then that comes up against, if you're an adult of 45 years old and you want to have a life and you want to have your things and just a nice piece of furniture, an SRO is not gonna cut it. We cannot look at SROs or those kind of topologies as complete or absolute, especially when there may not be access to a garden box. One of the trans femmes that spoke, she said, I'm a big girl, just like me, and I want to have a tub where my entire body except my head is covered. That is luxury to me. I don't think that's a lot to ask for. So again, between the trauma and the humility and the lack of imagination, there ends up being this optimism where people stated they're very aware when it comes to finding solutions for government supportive choice. They're very specific in stating, I just want to live in a society where I have my needs met, it is proportional to my income, and I have some access to community. So it is easy for me to access community while also having privacy. I think there are different topologies and ways we could talk about that. But then going to the third aspect, which is, sorry, I just need some tea. The next aspect was accountability and shared responsibility. And there ended up being conversation, not just within the group, but when I was speaking with people who were prior to the meeting and after. One of the questions I end up asking people is, I'm not just trying to ask you to envision what is the best apartment you want to live in, or what is the house you want to live in. I want you to envision what is a society where there is truth, option, justice, and accountability. What if we have a society where we are not dependent on the MO as it's been, because the MO of the market realities we've been in has not been serving the needs of many people. And that's how we got to where we are. And one of my, so I was gonna say informants, like a freaking interviewer, an anthropologist, one of the people who are part of the community, we ended up speaking, they said, here's the bottom line. The market operates on scarcity. Capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, operates on scarcity and lack of choice for all. Because as long as there is a population of people that can afford the rising cost of living, that market will be taken care of, and we are just all left scattering. So there ended up being a lot of conversations too when it comes to accountability and shared responsibility. Let's be accountable about the institutionalization of financialization of housing. Why is it that we give more credence and empathy and nuance of this ideal free market that says, oh, no, 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 no. If you let us be free, we'll act exactly as we need to. Well, honey, that's the free market has been acting in concert with the government and the societal political opinion since we've had this modern society. And so there ended up being a statement or a kind of optimistic challenge where it's like, why do we have to accept the way things are? Why do we have to accept that there is such limitation? And so I see I'm basically at the end of my 10 minutes. So a lot of this has been much more qualitative, and I'm sorry there's not more specifics when it comes to aspects of our revised rules and the specific sentences or the aspects that, the sentence that it refers to. And I apologize, I can't give you those specific things, but the best overall view I could give is that there's such a lack of options for overall community. They feel a sense of despair and lack of optimism, and people don't communicate with them. And there's a weirdness between the identities shared in our government that is protected and then the realities on the ground. We want to see finding solutions for government supportive choice in terms of there are modest ways we can have different topologies which meet the community needs and meet more accessibility needs for different varieties of people. And then in terms of accountability and shared responsibility, these people begged me just challenge the system, challenge the ways that we can look at scarcity and abundance and partnerships between private and public agencies, just so we can say, what if we invest more in social and public housing? And that is a way that the private market can have a true competitor. So it was a lot of despair and a lot of trauma, but at the same time, enough sense of sticking to one's convictions that our community, our society could be much more liberated and much more intersectional. And I think that's where I could stop because it's now 10 and a half minutes.
Thank you so much, Shane. It was a really powerful focus group, and thank you for recruiting and leading that. Just thinking about what the folks in the focus group talked about, it was challenging as well to hear, but also really important. And thinking about how this ties to, in particular, local governments and other affordable housing developers, is what are some things that we can glean from this? Maybe in rules or guidance, or actually local government, as you implement these rules. What does that mean related to possibly design? What I heard is SROs are not the one that solves everything. There's a continuum. And then also thinking about just accountability. as far as not only engaging with folks in your community, but thinking about, we heard a lot of folks had to move so many times every year. So thinking about housing stability as you do engagement with folks, how long are people able to stay in different neighborhoods? What's kind of the range of neighborhoods? You're looking at that as far as income level, but I think just the amount of trauma that these folks are experiencing, having to move, losing their stuff, being in unsafe neighborhoods or unsafe buildings. I think those pieces are the heart of this housing that we need to look at. It's the production is super important, but it's the people living in there and how they're treated with dignity. And I really do think there's opportunities to think about with this rulemaking as well, and also what local governments can do. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ethan. Maybe you can give a little thought process on that and then move us on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anita, and thank you, Shane, for sharing. I think those stories are important for this process, right? Because as we're thinking about how the ONA program works and achieves these particular outcomes that we've all identified as important, those are kind of the core and the reason why we have these things like the contextualized housing need, why the ONA takes this different posture towards the obligations of local governments and the state government to meet those needs and be actively planning for those needs. And so I would challenge us in the remainder of this meeting to hold those stories that Shane has provided close in our thinking about how we can inform not only the rest of these rules, but how the ONA program works in the long term, right? Because that's what we're here to do, is achieve those outcomes. And so I guess that's a challenge to everybody in this room to hold those as we're talking through the really technical elements of a contextualized housing need or a fair housing issue area analysis or the housing acceleration program, and try to ground those and set the frame towards those outcomes. So thanks again, Shane, and Ben, I'll hand this back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Anita. And mostly thank you, Shane, for the work you did and for lifting up those stories. And Ethan, I think you used the word optimistic challenge, which I love. And maybe that's one of the ways that we hold, the work that we have in front of us today. So I really appreciate, lifting up the stories and just emphasizing the dignity and agency of community and centering those experiences. So with that, I'm going to move us on. Karen, we're going to go to you on the update on capacity and urbanization tech work before moving into a broader discussion. So, Karen?
Yeah, and before we move on to my next slide, I just want to say it's a great segue as we think about choices, policy decisions that can happen at a local municipal level in light of what community members are experiencing on the ground. And how do we, as municipal planners or as community advocates within the planning profession, how do we advocate for those choices and those land use and policy decisions that create greater housing choice, greater abundance, greater diversity of housing? So with that said, another thank you to Shane. It ended up being a great segue. So I appreciate how you've set us up this morning and the leadership you brought in. And we can move to that next slide. We met with our Capacity and Urbanization Technical Advisory Committee last week, and we revisited a couple areas of the framework, the equitable racial equity framework for decision making. And we've talked with our TAC members previously multiple times around benefits and burdens, and then also tracking and measuring, evaluating outcomes and continuous improvement. But in this sense, we wanted to really take our TAC members through what a goal 10 analysis and transition into a goal 14 analysis. So from your housing planning to your urbanization planning and what that looks like when we think about the urban growth boundary. And one of the areas that is right in the middle of this transition from goal 10 to goal 14 is how are lands and zoning and capacity, how is that most efficiently, and what are best practices around efficiency within an urban growth boundary. And what lands within an urban growth boundary can often remain undeveloped, whether they're partially vacant, or whether it's costly to bring in infrastructure, or they're constrained by topography or resources in the area. And so we started to talk through with our TAC members around topics of when you know you have significant disparities in benefits and burdens, when you look at the historical inequities that are known in your community, both past, present, and how they might perpetuate into the future. And when you think about how you are reporting on your outcomes, how you're tracking and measuring your improvements and what's the outcome you're trying to achieve, what are some of the additional resources and assistance that local governments might need from the state? Or where would they find those resources and that political support and assistance from leadership and decision makers? And some of the areas around efficiency measures, we can think about rezoning, the establishment of new zones, thinking about minimum lot sizes and what's present within your local land use regulations, thinking about minimum densities. And oftentimes it's planners looking at their city and saying, where can we upzone? Where can we add different types of housing? And how do we bring these decisions to our planning commission or city council and talk about trade-offs of what happens and where it happens? And I think that's important because as we think about how we create more housing, different types of housing, greater choice of housing, we're also looking within our cities of where do we do this work? Where do we choose within the geography to do greater efficiencies? And then we have to think about there's only so much the market will support to the points that's been made around market demand. And you may need to extend that urban growth boundary. And what does that expansion area look like as far as types of housing, diversity of housing, choice of housing, and what choices are made within an expansion area? So some of the areas that we specifically looked at in our rules, Ellen, if you want to go to the next slide, through the lens of our racial equity framework, we looked at land determination, response to our housing capacity, and then how lands get prioritized, choices that are made around eliminating unsuitable land for an expansion, and then really wading through some of the location factors of where best to expand and what types of housing, how can we rely on bringing in the types of housing. I will say much of the conversation from our TAC members were around, it is one thing to zone for capacity. It is another thing and another set of policies to complement the zoning to really produce the housing that we need. So what are the affordability measures around housing, the accessibility measures? And sometimes these actions and these policy choices are strategies that go way beyond strictly our basic land use regulations. And so that's something that we're grappling with the TAC. And we share this with you every month, what's happening in capacity and urbanization, because as Ethan shared in December, this RAC will start to make that shift to not only be thinking about the housing rules and housing regulations that we've been talking about for months, but then also the urbanization and urban growth boundary rules and regulations. And so I bring that to you with forethought of what's coming in December and what's coming in 2025. These RAC meetings will be centered around these types of conversations. All right, Ben, I think that's it, unless there's any clarifying questions.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So yeah, let's take a pause moment if there's any questions for Karen. Seeing any? It's confirming.
That
Carmen?
is fun, and we'll have plenty of time in future meetings.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, let's move on. So before I pass it to Madi, we're gonna move into the next, hour and whatever, 2 hours, couple hours of time together. So, Monday morning brain. Next couple hours of our conversation really focused on two really important pieces. So one is kind of continuing to bring you all along and reflect on kind of an overview of key changes and updates that have been incorporated into the 3.0 draft rules. And so they've gotten a time to really offer some reflection and see how the work we've done is contributing to the ongoing drafts. And then we have some really pointed spaces for conversation around outstanding points of interest and some deeper thinking and dialogue and discussion with this group around some real key areas that we want to get feedback on. Kind of how do you balance trade-offs and how do you identify the critical pieces that are going to be necessary to be able to execute and implement the ONA in ways that are going to best serve our communities, and again, just reflecting back on all that we've heard around what's possible and what's necessary. So with that context, Madi, I think you're going to kick us off.
I am, and thank you, Ben. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. It's good to be in community with you all. For the record, my name is Maddie. I use she or they pronouns, and I'm a housing planner with the department. I want to kick off my presentation first by extending another moment of appreciation and gratitude to this rulemaking advisory committee. Y'all, we've been meeting since April, once every month, and we've gotten so far. So far, that last week, we released the third iteration of draft rules to implement the first phase of the ONA policy. And that work could not have been done without the collective expertise in this room and your commitment to this rulemaking process. So warm kudos to everyone here. That said, I do want to take a moment to quickly ground us in the work that we've been doing since April to integrate the ONA policy into Goal 10, or Housing Planning Goal. You've seen this slide before in past presentations. It's our graphic depiction of the various components of statewide planning Goal 10 housing planning process. This is really the process that cities go through to understand and provide the needs of their community members. And at the highest level, there are three major items that comprise this planning process. First, it's cities determining their housing need through the contextualized housing need analysis. It's responding to those needs identified in the contextualized housing need through meaningful and responsive actions included in a city's action plan, or what we call the housing production strategy. And then we're tracking and monitoring progress on the actions that cities outline in the HPS. We can go to the next slide. And the work that we've been doing since April is really around revamping this process to align the policies, the ONA policy's intent, which we've been talking about already in this meeting, which is really about ensuring housing production, affordability, and housing choice on the ground. The first phase to revamp this process has been on a focus on the contextualized housing need, the housing production strategy, and the acceleration program. Gavin just noted that we'll pivot soon and we'll dive into that work around urbanization and capacity around the corner. So my focus here is really grounding us on the three items I just noted. The contextualized housing need and housing production strategy already had seeds, if you will, of affirmatively furthering fair housing and the fair housing principle. And through our discussions, we've been able to reorganize and revamp these pieces more intentionally to ensure that these components are affirmatively furthering fair housing. In other words, they're compelling cities to actively work to undo historical patterns of segregation and promote equitable housing outcomes. Specifically for the contextualized housing need, we have introduced a review of past discriminatory actions and a fair housing issue area analysis. And what that means is cities are now positioned to intentionally identify fair housing issues and other housing needs. A lot of the things that Shane was bringing up in her note, that's exactly what we've positioned cities to do. It's setting the stage for determining housing types, characteristics, and locations that address those fair housing issues and meet broader housing needs. For the housing production strategy, we've strengthened the link between the conclusions of the contextualized housing need and the actions selected in the HPS. So now cities really do choose actions that address those identified fair housing issues through targeted housing types, characteristics, and location. We've clarified community engagement in the housing production strategy program and required a community engagement as essential in the selection of actions in the HPS. Additionally, the housing production strategy now distinguishes between actions and exploratory work, both critical elements that we've all agreed are comprise the HPS work, but we've made clarifications of the role that each play in the HPS program. And lastly, for the acceleration program, we've built out this framework for tracking housing production, monitoring progress on cities' HPS work, and providing support as needed. So y'all, we've made significant progress in this rulemaking process. I commend you all again, but we're not done. We're not done yet in terms of this first phase. We're there, we're close, but we're not done. We still have some key points that we need to address, some of which I noted just now, which is the point of our forthcoming discussion. Before we get there, though, I do want to take a moment with Thea to do a quick overview of the updates we've made from draft version 2 of the rules to draft version 3. So if we can go to the next slide, please. First, I want to highlight the definition section of rules. There were multiple amendments that we did to this section, and you can see those, and I won't hit them all, but they are outlined in your policy notes document or item 5 of your meeting packet. So please, I'm sure you all have dug in there already, but that's where that's at. I will highlight that we did make, we added 3 new definitions to this particular section of draft rule. We heard feedback about a desire for these terms to be defined to ensure clarity. They were used in the rule, and definitions were desired to ensure that the rules were operating right and clear. So those terms include environmental justice, and this is a definition. It was defined using an existing definition in statute, ORS 182.535. We've defined housing acceleration agreement, and we've defined midpoint report. Moving on to the next item I want to highlight, it's the contextualized housing need review and adoption process. Here in version 3, through informed from the counsel of our department's legal counsel, we included a third pathway for reviewing and adopting the contextualized housing need. And that specifically focuses on any city who is eligible for the sequential UGB amendment process. They can adopt the contextualized housing need as an element of a work plan under that program, under the sequential UGB amendment process. So there's 3 pathways now, all of which we're still kind of working through with our legal counsel. And really options are very legally limited at this point. So as we continue to tease out those on our end, those 3 pathways, we certainly welcome feedback always, but just keep in mind those pathways are pretty limited. The next item I want to move on to highlight in terms of version 3 is related to actions, and specifically flexibility in actions. So we received mixed feedback on how flexible the HPS program should be when it comes to actions, when it comes to exploratory work, and replacing actions entirely. And so in response to all this feedback, we've done a couple things. We've revised the definition of action to now allow for a primary action and an alternate option. Either the primary or the alternate can be implemented to meet the HPS requirements. And really this change was to ensure flexibility for cities to pursue ambitious actions or actions that require more exploration without undermining the HPS as an action plan. Also note that implementing an alternate action doesn't need additional approval as long as it stays within the timeline that a city outlines in their HPS for that particular action. The other area where we've tried to be responsive to the various feedback we received on flexibility related to action is around the midpoint report rule. And so midpoint report is really at a city's midpoint, whether they're on a 6-year cycle or 8-year cycle, their midpoint is 3 or 4 years into that work. They submit a report on how they're doing in terms of implementing their actions. And what we've done is we've simplified that report process by removing the requirement to submit separate requests for adjustments to actions before that midpoint report. So now the midpoint report itself serves as the change request if needed. And another note I'll make on that particular piece is if cities do make a change to actions, so they're replacing actions, cities do have to demonstrate that that change in action or will be similar to the original, so original action. So they have to be one for one in terms of ensuring that they're meeting the identified need that they were intended to originally meet. Next, really quickly, I'll just note that we have modified the engagement sections of rule. And really, we were getting feedback around some areas seemed unclear or could be better organized, or expectations could be outlined much more clear. And so that's really what we've done. We've done refinements to those sections to ensure clarity on the expectations and to better group and describe summaries required. And lastly, the final note I'll make before I hand it over to Thea for her updates is around our safe harbor approach and direction. We know, and you all know, there's been strong interest in the concept of safe harbors within the housing production strategy and the acceleration program as part of this rulemaking. You might recall, even at your last meeting, that most of our discussion was focused on safe harbors. And you also might recall that through that discussion, we ultimately seemed to be coalescing towards the end around agreeing that the concept is something that we want to continue to consider, but potentially within the time frame of our rulemaking process, it might not be possible to come away with a narrow set of safe harbors that we all feel good about. So after reviewing extensive feedback from folks and considering the challenges that data limitations pose to the development of safe harbors, as well as the timeline within our current rulemaking for this phase 1 of this rules, we chose to remove the safe harbor language related to housing type mix from version 2 and version 3. So there's no safe harbor type mix in version 3. We did not introduce additional safe harbors for housing characteristics or location needs identification. But I will note that, our last discussion at the RAC, feedback we received underscored just the clear interest in the development of a standardized compliance pathway for adoption-ready actions, whether through safe harbors, minimum standards, or other tools. We received a wide range of kind of conflicting opinions, and added piece about data limitations, also complicate the ability for us to get there in this time frame. That said, House Bill 2001 and Senate Bill 1564 always included direction to our department to develop resources and tools. In fact, 2025 was always slated. We've always had it in our work plan for staff to work with advisory committee. So after the adoption of these rules, quickly shift gears into working with our advisory committee. So HOTAC and NAPTAC, and even possibly the COWTAC, on the development of a library of adoption-ready actions, including model codes, these tools that cities can use that would be readily available for use on the ground. And so staff will continue this work as planned in 2025, but the piece about the safe harbors and the compliance pathways will be added to this body of work. So in the meantime, we've introduced a new section into the HPS rules, which you all might have saw. It's called Adoption Ready Actions. And the work that we do in 2025 is can be folded into this particular rule section. So more to come. That's where we're at in terms of the direction on safe harbors or other tools. And I think the last thing I'll note is we're still working internally. We're planning to figure out how the NAPTAC and the HOTAC and this rule advisory committee kind of shift into gears in December for that work. So please stay tuned for more information on that. Details are forthcoming. So with that, I'll hand it over to Thea.
Thank you, Maddie. Ellen, we can switch to the next slide. Hi, all. It's really nice to be here with you today. For the record and for people online, I'm Thea Croman. I'm a housing planner with DLCD. And kind of jumping in right where Maddie left off, I'm going to talk through the sort of relatively minor changes that were included in draft 3.0 of the rule updates. I'll start with something that really ties in with Mari's presentation, specifically around action flexibility at the midpoint. This carries through really directly to an element of the referral process. And you'll remember that there are 4 tracks into the acceleration program. One of those is if you have not, as a city, taken action on one of the actions that was included and committed to in your HPS. It was clear that there was always intended to be some flexibility here. Exactly how and what mechanism was quite vague, to be honest. So we developed along with Mari and Celestina this option to at the midpoint, request a replacement action that, as Mari indicated, would be demonstrably equal to the action that it was replacing. So you'll see that in there. There's also a delineation that I think was already in the draft rules, but worth mentioning here that there's also you have, as a city, the possibility to request an extension and work on a work plan with DLCD if it seems that the original action was the right one. You just need a little bit of extra time to commit to it. In the audit program, we developed out a new section that prioritizes specifically an evaluation of barriers to fair housing choice. And that includes barriers to the construction of accessible housing and housing for people with disabilities. And I'll add that we're going to continue to workshop that language, and in the next draft it will be even more specific, but you'll see that that is sort of pinned in there right now. And if you're curious, it's under section 0325 and in sub 5 there. I'll also note that in this section, it's not there right now, but this section will also draw through the adoption ready policies and the prioritization of those adoption ready policies in the audit program. More to come on those details as well. Finally, the enforcement tools always included the LCDC enforcement order as an endpoint. The draft 3.0 rules just offer some more specificity there and outline a process by which DLCD recommends a certain set of responses in that LCDC enforcement order that they recommend to the commission. In any case, if they get to the enforcement order point, there will be a model code that is included in the LCDC enforcement order. And the department will also tailor other enforcement actions and tools to the nature of the violation. And those are the primary updates. Mari also covered some of the definitions that were added. So thank you for doing that. And I think we can move on. Thanks, Ben.
Great, thanks, Monty. Thanks, Thea. Let's just pause for questions for clarity or anything coming up for folks.
There's a message from Mercedes.
Good, thank you, Anita.
Question about safe harbor. I think I heard that the safe harbor were not going to be in the rule itself, but instead DLCD would have more like a library of model codes. Is that correct? Mari, you want to answer that?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I saw Ethan too, so maybe you can build on anything or correct me if I'm wrong, but that's correct. So the latest version 3 of our rules do not include safe harbors, and a lot of that is just around the feedback that we received and our timeline. However, our work in 2025 will inform future development of whether it be safe harbors or minimum standards or other tools for compliance in the HPS program. So it's giving us a little bit more time as we all kind of coalesced around this need and desire to continue the discussion, but be more thoughtful and intentional about this work as part of the 2025 work.
Ethan?
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say for safe harbors, I think maybe we could characterize it as like the work of 2025. So in 2024, we won't see any safe harbor rules because we're going to have that conversation collectively as a group in 2025, which will give us the space and time to have that conversation all the way to the end, right? And in the 2024 rules, we provide, I don't know, maybe a bad analogy, but like a road stub for us to collectively as a group to come back and fill out that conversation around adoption ready actions. That section, I think it's 02110 or sorry, 0210, 0210 is the section where we would hold adoption ready actions, right? And so that conversation is an ongoing one, and we recognize the need for filling out that kind of support, guidance, direction for local governments based on the conversations that we've had with you all. And so that's just we will get to that point, but we won't see that in 2024. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, does that answer, Mercedes? So it's future oriented. I don't know if library of model, I think the language is adoption ready actions, but really not in the short term, but really the work in 2025. Does that answer the question, Mercedes?
It does, and it's helpful to kind of understand that timeline. I guess I would just wonder if if it changes the utilization of those tools to be even further optional, because like in the rule, it kind of creates an expectation of engagement. So if it's not in the rule, can and a local community is trying to update its codes, it doesn't have any obligation to engage with DLCD on it. Like they could go find model code somewhere else. You're just offering them a potential optional resource, right? Or is there still an expectation of engagement around that in the kind of development process and the audit process?
Interesting question. Yeah, thank you. I don't know. I mean, Thea, I don't know if you have any response there in the acceleration side of things, but I think when we talk about the adoption ready actions, where that goes and how it's used in the housing production strategy and the housing acceleration program, I think it's still a point of discussion, right? Like how those safe harbors truly do function, how the guidance would function, how those are different, and you know, how much of each of those things we're providing in rule, I think are, you know, to be determined still at this point. And so we'll have that conversation in 2025 and answer all of those questions. But I think in the interim, in the time that we'll you know, that 1 year time frame between January 1st of 2025 and January 1st of 2026, when we'll have those safe harbors, and if cities are working through things like a housing production strategy or housing capacity analysis, I think those are questions that'll just take some more engagement between DLCD and those particular cities, because there is that kind of transitional gray period. But I think we'll be able to answer a lot of those questions more concretely in, you know, 12 months from now. But Celestina.
Yeah. And I think, Ethan, just to clarify about that transition period, no jurisdictions will need to be working with the rules that we adopt at the end of this year, next year. So all of the due dates related to jurisdictions who will be using the new rules, the soonest one is December of 27, which means if you were to begin working with the new rules, you would have them on January 1st of 26 and would have all of 26 and 27 to work with those new rules. And so existing HPS work underway is using the old rules. We've just been using the shorthand, old rules and new rules. So I don't know if that helps with questions, Mercedes, about what a jurisdiction might do tomorrow or in January or something like that.
And Celestine, I think
why don't you jump in, because I think there's a related question.
Yeah, it's a question from Julia about clarifying the work plan for 2025. Will it impact or relate to planned HPS processes for cities in 2025? Will those be delayed until this future work is completed? So
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think Celestina answered that question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mary Kyle?
So in the same range of questions, so if I understand the answer to Julia's question and Celestina and others have been saying, so the work that will be done in 2025 on model ordinances, safe harbors, minimum standards, all that, will not be a required or guideline or whatever for HPSs until the soonest at the end of 27, if I remember that, if I recall what Celestina just said, which is already like, I'm not sure I got that date right. But so I was concerned that LCDC will be adopting this set of rules at the end of this year. But the next year, we're really getting into some meaty stuff with model ordinances, safe harbors, et cetera. So how those are integrated into what's adopted at the end of this year was a key question. And I think what I heard is no one is going to be using any parts of these rules until 2027. So they will be fully integrated when that starts happening. And in the meantime, cities are it's not like their HPS dates are delayed. They're just operating under the old existing rules. Is that correct? Sort of?
Yes. Probably the only modification I would make is that it's not that no one will be working with them until the end of 27. That folks would probably be starting to work with the new rules at the end of 25 for due dates for these deliverables at the end of 27. So a lot of
because
the work,
they will be adopted then at the end of 25, they'll know what they are. Okay.
Exactly.
So that seems to answer my other question. Is I wasn't sure how long we would be working on these on the fun stuff in 2025. Is that the whole year? At some point I had in my brain that was like the first 6 months, but I think it's going to be the whole year, it sounds like now, right?
That's right. Yeah. So that'll be, very similar to the timeline for 2024, right? Now we're kind of wrapping it up and that's in October. So about I guess it's not a full 12 months, but
right.
Just because of the adoption, public hearing timelines. But and then, Mary Kyle and others here, I think that work continues, right? even beyond 2020, 2025. There's, I'm sure we'll get to a certain point that we're all generally comfortable with, but there will be lots more on the horizon beyond that time.
I expect the HPS will be a dynamic document that will be
That's right.
constantly updating and such. So, okay, that all helped a lot and answered a lot of the questions that I had for where we are now. So thank you, Celestine and Ethan.
Appreciate it. Any other clarifying questions around this piece before we move into kind of some very direct conversations around points of interest? Well, thank you for those points of clarity and helping us collectively understand not just kind of where we are now, but the work that's in front of us going into the next year. Okay, last call for questions around the updates that show up in 3.0. Okay, well, not seeing any. I think, Monty, we're going to come back to you. And so we're going to move just procedurally. We're going to have a topic. You can see the high level question around kind of balancing trade-offs. And so we're going to move through a few areas where you'll get a little bit of a briefing and then really open for conversation. And so this is a point where we're really hoping for a robust discussion and for folks to really bring your collective wisdom into the room. So really just encourage folks to kind of enter in often to give input. Marty?
Thank you, Ben. As noted earlier, that we're not done. We're close, but we're not done. We've got 4 areas of rule that, present their own challenges, particularly when it comes to balancing local government capacity, the need for racial equity driven approaches, and our shared goal of creating a planning system that positions and empowers cities to work on housing production, affordability, and choice. So we're going to take these one by one. This first kind of area of rule is a very foundational one. As noted earlier, we've added a review, or we've introduced to the contextualized housing need a review and analyzing of past discriminatory housing actions as part of the contextualized housing need. And this was informed through extensive discussions with the Needs and Production Technical Advisory Committee, which was charged with, pulling that integration of AFFH into housing planning. We've had multiple discussions with this particular advisory group, and really our collective, I think, leaning of our racial equity framework for decision making. This rule is really rooted in that, by us leaning into that framework and really highlighting and leaning into accountability and reparative justice components that are outlined there. We know that historical patterns of discrimination, such as redlining, exclusionary zoning, and racial covenants, continue to shape our housing inequities today. We've heard a need to critically address these legacies as a crucial step in advancing fair housing. That's the work we've been talking about for a good amount of time through this rulemaking process. But we also have heard and learned that this information is not currently uniform and it's not ready available. We have heard concerns about local government's capacity, challenges they face currently, and potential for cities to not have the tools or the resources or the data access to thoroughly map and analyze these past practices. So there is concerns about cities' ability to conduct the analysis. I'll note the draft rule as outlined requires this piece, but it is a requirement to be done once every 3 HPS cycles. So a city's doing their HPS, doing this review, and then they'll do this review again at the 3rd update to their HPS. So if they're on a 6-year cycle, that's 6 times 3. If they're on the 8-year cycle, it's 8 times 3. With that, let's open the floor to discuss how we're doing on this front. You know, how do you see us navigating these trade-offs between the need for reparative justice and resource limitations of local governments? How do we balance that? And then what potential solutions or approaches can we explore to make this rule more equitable and feasible for all? So that's my question to you all. Back to you, Ben.
Thanks, buddy. So we'll see if there's initial responses, then we might have to be creative with how we continue to ask the question. Shane, jump in, please.
Hi, great, thank you. I have been connected with people over the last several months who are doing something called the Queer Data Project. And it's essentially it is the first statewide led effort to get data for queer Oregonians. And so I only bring that up and I'm trying to see how I can loop that into the conversations. And it's just a larger example of I will always have empathy for lack of resources. And so if there are lack of resources, let's be efficient. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's try to center the organizations of the people who are coming forth who genuinely want to do that work, and we may all benefit from it. It's just trying to figure out how to link those resources together and get the right people in the room. Just so I think, yeah, that's just an example. And I'm happy to give links to people. People have questions about that. You know, it's something I'm genuinely interested in.
Thank you, Shane. Shannon and Mercedes.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising this question. I think that this very need and opportunity has really come to the forefront for the Unlocking Homeownership Coalition that's forming coming into the 2025 legislative session. And we've been paying attention to the Covenant Home Ownership Study and Act, both passed in Washington State. And we have an LC dropped actually to pursue a statewide Oregon Covenant Homeownership Study to emulate the one performed in Washington, which would look at all racially restrictive covenants at the city, county, and state level that have been enacted. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. Who was that? America or Mercedes America?
Thanks. So I think I have a question kind of on this is like, what is the expectation from DLCD in the way local governments would be collecting and analyzing that information? Because what I just heard in those two comments was like that there is community resources available where it's not the city having to do the research itself or even the literature review itself, but really leaning on other community assets. And I think sometimes there's not a clear guidance on like how much you can use information that's been developed through other pathways versus how much you as a local government have to do, you know, hire a consultant specifically to collect that information for you to show that you originated it. And so I wonder like how within that process is there guidance on, you know, what is a reputable like third party document, or like how do you partner with you know a larger community entity like what Shane was mentioning around queer data that may not be specific to your city, actually might include lots of cities' data, because that might help with the capacity thing. But I think it also has to be clear to the local government how they can lean on those additional resources without having to recreate or justify their utilization of them. So just wondering if you've all had that discussion yourself about how much you expect the cities to originate that data versus how you can provide guidance on utilizing community available assets.
Folks, DLC, Monty, yeah.
That's a really great question, Mercedes, and we have thought about it. That is actually part of the work of 2025. You know, and we were always work plan to do adoption ready actions, but part of that is also resources and tools for local governments to do this planning work. And so in your packet there was, and I forget which item there was, but we've been hearing we've been receiving feedback about potential pieces within the process, the planning process, that could be helpful for us DLCD to outline in a guidance book. So that is our goal at the end of 2025 is to develop guidance book on how these pieces work for cities to use. And the item there in your attachment is us collecting what we've been hearing and as a good starting block for that work in 2025. So the nuggets here that Shane and that Shannon just offered are definitely noted, at least for me, and we'll be adding that. But that's really the there is no expectation rule for the how, but there is a desire, or there is the department working through that to offer support in this particular rule as part of that guidance work that we're doing in 2025.
Thanks, Bonnie. Am I interpreting that then as that is one of the ways that capacity is balanced, is ensuring that community generated data that has the level kind of integrity and local application would be one of the ways that you balance that responsibility? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Mary Kyle?
Hi, I think this might relate to what Shannon was just talking about too, but I wanted to just make sure that the definitions in the contextualized housing need section, and I really like the improvements in this. I should start by saying this. I think it looks really, the version 3 looks very good, but I just want to make sure we're also, in addition to looking at past discriminatory actions and practices, are looking at current discriminatory actions and practices, like exclusionary zoning to exclusionary single family detached housing, HOAs and covenants and restrictions that restrict large scale housing developments to that. We hear that today those active CCNRs and HOAs are getting in the way of building middle housing, and inappropriate use of National Register Historic Districts, things like that, that are intentionally excluding, economically excluding, which obviously has a racial impact, diverse and relatively more affordable housing types. So I just want to make sure we're not just looking at the past and thinking it's not happening today, and that we're also looking at current practices that are exclusionary.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Kyle. And is that as simple as saying past and current discriminatory? Like, if it is it, or is there more depth to like what the rules should be describing, or is it really just
like sub H in the contextualized housing need talks about past discriminatory actions and their relationship to current patterns of racial and ethnic. That's, we definitely should be looking at that, because we see the past discrimination is reflected in our development patterns today, but we also have to look at current practices. So I don't want to wordsmith, at least in this meeting, but you know what I mean? I think, yeah.
No, I think I appreciate you drawing that line, right? It's to do that analysis as a way to try to understand how that is impacting folks contemporaneously, but that's not just a look back, right? It's a look now, right? If I hear you.
Right.
So Steve, mute.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And it might be something about word choice or even using the word current elsewhere in the rule. But basically, the reason that past discriminatory action section was added is because the entire HPS is about current circumstances and is about current codes and how those current codes are playing out, and how current CCNRs are a so but again, maybe if that thread doesn't seem as potent as or as front and center as it seemed when we added the past discriminatory actions case in, maybe there's a way we can use current elsewhere, because really the whole program is about those current things, those current circumstances.
And I haven't read every word in version 3, but I have. So if it's in there, great. But I've said enough. I just don't want us to only look at past. And what's there is great under H. Just want to make sure we're not missing the rest of it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Kyle. So I think your comments are held and heard for sure. Beth, jump in.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I sit listening to all of what has been said so far. And Shane, thank you so much for your eloquent statement. I mean, I sit in awe with the accomplishments that advocates have have made along the way. And then I have to, when I'm thinking contextualized housing needs for Curry County or the South Coast, the racial equity framework is a completely different animal. I mean, it's there, but it's more of a socioeconomic discriminatory actions that take place more so than it falls upon the lines of racial or um, um, barriers that exist. Our barriers that exist is a lack of buildable land inventory. Our barriers that exist is a super serious lack of resources. But I do think that more of our Indigenous advocacy groups are building. We have Southwest Equity Coalition, so I think we can find some nuggets of information there. But leadership is what it comes down to for us. I sit in Gold Beach, I live in Gold Beach, and I honor our mayor and our city manager because they are leading and working with interested parties that want to develop. For us, diverse, inclusive housing is PSH, sober living. We have 0 units that fit those definitions in our community. So we're really so far behind the rest of you that are down the road. But I just felt it was important to bring that voice forward for those of us that are although we're coastal, we're still very resource poor, and we are looking at barriers that are going to be very difficult to get around. There aren't very many jurisdictions within the South Coast that are going to be immediately affected or going to meet the thresholds for having to do a lot of this work and comply. I understand that, but I just also wanted to voice that. It's just a very different animal down here and up along the coast. Our neighbors to the north have been very productive. Curry is just, Gold Beach in particular is just starting to get some real traction and motivation with some units coming online very soon for transitional housing and additional low-income affordable housing that our housing authority is working on. I just wanted to say those words out loud for y'all, for those of us that are living in rural frontier areas. And thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Beth, and thanks for just giving some additional kind of localized context, within this broader conversation. Thank you. Other reflections around this question around past and current discriminatory actions, mapping, analysis, capacity. Okay. Well, we have 3 other topics. We're at 10:30. Why don't we take a break now and come back at 10:37, and then we'll kind of do a sprint through our last hour and 15 or so through several other topics, very similar theming, right? So it's really introducing an issue, and just like we just did, having a conversation around what's coming up for folks and how do we kind of find these balances and trade-offs in ways that are going to most be effective to the work. So it's 10:28 officially on my clock. So let's come back at 10:38. We'll take 10 and see you then. All right, 10:38, welcome back. Folks want to do a camera on, thumbs up, some indication, let me know that you're back with us. Hey, Shannon, a wave, Brock, okay, Lisa, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, well, let us continue our conversation. Are we going back to you, Marty? Who's doing each one? Yes. Marty.
That's me. Um, all right. So this next topic area is around flexibility in the actions for both the HPS and the Housing Acceleration Program. You know, I mentioned earlier that at the core of the housing production strategy, this program really is, or this item really is an action plan. Um, we have heard and discussed that achieving the housing goals often requires time, exploratory work, and adjusting course based on new findings. That is part of the work of the housing production strategy that ultimately inform the actions. Um, and that's where I think flexibility becomes a key consideration. The challenge of balancing this action plan as in its structure and the flexibility within is what we have to is the focus of this particular item here. Um, on the one side, we need the HPS to serve as a clear action-oriented framework with measurable outcomes. And then on the other side, we need to recognize that some actions will require adjustments based on local conditions and research and evolving circumstances. Earlier, I went through some of the modifications we made through the definition of actions and exploratory work to kind of, make a distinct connection between these two important pieces that are part of the actions in HPS. Thea and I noted the changes to the midpoint report that offers flexibility to local governments in that regard. And we've added this rule around if cities do replace an action, whether it be a primary or an alternate, that replacement action has to be responsive to the need that action was originally addressing. So you can see that, we've been hearing the feedback about the importance of keeping true to an action plan while also offering flexibility, giving the very real realities that cities face in terms of capacity and resources. And we've tried to balance this feedback, but I think we still need to explore if we've got it right. That's the question. Like, have we, based on what you see in rule, what we've described, what version 3, outlines, and our recognition of the HPS as an action plan, or have we balanced it all? Are the rules structured giving local governments too much flexibility, for example, or is it not giving enough flexibility? How can we ensure that the flexibility in action doesn't lead to delays in meeting housing goals or compromises in advancing fair housing objectives? So with that, I put it back to you all to give us direction there in terms of taking all these trade-offs that I just noted and seeing, getting that temperature check about whether the balance has been right or we need to lean a little bit more here or a little bit more there.
Yeah, Brock, jump in.
Oh, yeah, actually, I wasn't even going to speak to the balance, but just so that we're talking about rule 200 and then 2C. Well, 2 and 2C. We're referencing attachment B. I don't think this is a problem here, and maybe this is somewhere else that I just don't know. But is there a mention of a process for how attachment B is updated? So for example, like say, a city goes through, they choose a housing action that's not necessarily one that's in the attachment, but they think is going to, they demonstrate through their process that it has a similar effect, right? Is there kind of a periodic review for saying like, okay, this is what we have, a city did this, which is similar but not quite the same. Now we can like add that into the list every couple of years, however long that period is. I didn't see a specific call out for it, but it might exist in current rule that I just don't know about.
I'm not sure I tracked exactly what. So maybe could you try one more time, Brock? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. I got a little word salady there. So if a city chooses to implement an action that's not in the attachment B strategies list, is there anything in existing rule that's maybe not in this V3, or could we add something in that just kind of describes an update schedule for that attachment, so that if a city's done something that ended up being effective and it's like, okay, similar to this, but not quite, here's kind of an alternative method of it or something like that.
I see. Thank you. Sorry, I was slow on the uptake there. I think you did probably articulate it just fine the first time. That attachment or the housing production strategy menu is a guidance material. And it, as you're noting, it can be updated at any time. It doesn't have its own update schedule in rule, like the HCA and HPS schedule has to be updated annually in January. So I think the question of, is there a schedule? How often is it? Is there a directive that anything that a city does that was successful be included, or is there a threshold, or is it just discretionary over time as things prove up? I think those are questions that aren't currently outlined. So I appreciate you raising it, Ethan.
I would also just add that the commission, LCDC, Land Conservation Development Commission, has a rulemaking that they conduct every January, or their first meeting of every calendar year, to update the housing capacity analysis schedule when cities have their deadlines. And in the crafting of that structure of having that calendar, or that the deadline calendar schedule updated every year, the thought was that we could come back and amend both of those attachments, attachment A being the schedule and attachment B being that list of policies, housing production strategy, tools, actions, and policies. And we've only amended and updated those documents twice or one time as a package. But we've updated attachment A, the schedule, every single year. And part of that is just because we're focusing on ONA, and cities really hadn't conducted housing production strategies at that time. And so the hope is that we can come back and use that January of every calendar year rulemaking as the space for that. And of course, the conversation that we have in 2025 related to updated guidance and safe harbors and all of those things factors into that. So, that seems like something we can definitely sort out, but always intended to be updated over time is the short answer.
Sounds like a great solution. Thank you.
I think I'll just add to, if helpful for folks too, so they track just the work too. So this is also part of our 2025 work plan to update that attachment B, especially in light of the adoption ready action that we'll be developing in 2025. And the way that we've structured that rule is really to incentivize cities to use that menu that has always been a non-exhaustive list that, like Ethan said, we've committed to continually update as the program progresses, and we're very early, in this program, right? The first set of HPSs just were adopted last year. So the way that we've structured the rule is for cities to say which action on that list, tell us like the code exactly that you're using in your HPS, and if you don't, then tell us why. So there is this secondary piece to almost incentivize that HPS and the forthcoming work in 2025.
Thank you. Let's go, Julia. And I would love to, because I think this section and the next section around engagement has a real potential overlay, and particularly just reflecting back on what Shane introduced at the start of our meeting, thinking about kind of the consequences, balancing of, both the HPS's action with the evolving and exploratory work that can inform actions. And Monty, to your question, just really thoughts that folks might have around how do you balance, right, the kind of taking action with exploring and engagement and the timelines that it might take to do that well and be really truly responsive to what community need is. So Julia, let's go to you, and then I'd just love to introduce and ask some of our community advocates to continue to kind of come in and offer some reflection there. Julia, jump in.
Yeah, thanks. So kind of related to that, actually, I was just wanted some clarification, I guess, on kind of the thought around accountability timeline for these. So basically, when and how does a city notify DLCD that they might be switching over to kind of this alternative action? Is there a required report out for that, or is this all happening during the midpoint review? Like basically kind of what's the structure, I guess, for how this fits into the overall review process on DLCD side first, and then I might have follow up to that.
Want to take the DLCD? Yeah, Marty.
Well, I was just gonna say, Thea, do you want to take that piece?
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah,
As the
no
lead in
problem.
writing the rule, I just wanna, step
Right.
back.
To answer your question, Julia, yes, there is a structure. It does happen in the midpoint review, where they make a formal request to switch to a replacement action, and there has to be sort of a a conversation with DLCD and an evaluation from the department to ensure that it functionally accomplishes the same goal. I think that there's that will be a formal part of the midpoint review. I think was there another part of your question that I'm missing?
That was the first part of the question. I was waiting to hear that before I jumped into then my feedback. So first of all, I think that this is a move in the right direction and appreciate you all taking some time to think about it, especially because I know this is one of many, but one that I feel like really kind of bridges the kind of NAPTAC and HATTAC side of things. So appreciate the thought that's gone into this. The one thing that I just wanted to pose for thought, while also recognizing the true balance between capacity of cities to actually like have time to do the work, is I'm just wondering if there's a way or some grounds for kind of making sure we're tracking when that initial action item was said to be implemented or adopted. And if that is before the midpoint review, is there a way for us to be kind of just checking in, or I don't know, at the very least, like, again, have some accountability for cities to be flagging if that's not happening on track, and then maybe switching to that alternative item so that you're not waiting all the way to the midpoint review. Maybe that comes in the form of that that cities know that at the midpoint review, if they haven't been staying on track for hitting those action items and then the associated alternative actions, that there's, I don't know, outcomes to that. I don't like, so that maybe there's not necessarily something that has to be happening before the midpoint review, but cities know that if they don't have documentation to kind of show that they've been doing their due diligence in the meantime, that that's going to be an issue. Don't have quite a perfectly baked solution, but basically just want to call out waiting to the midpoint review feels a little bit maybe too generous, but I do like the flexibility that's being built into here while acknowledging the importance of these exploratory activities and then having some backup options baked into an HPS.
Thanks, Julia. I just want to offer one more note of clarification. Maybe it's clear, but if not, this issue, as you're noting, is really important. So I just want to cover our bases here. That what we presented kind of has two pathways almost for like these adjustments, and some are those predetermined pathways that we called alternate action. So that would be already adopted at the time of the HPS adoption, and that's the goal there is to actually give cities who might self-identify that certain actions are more ambitious or more challenging and already have an alternate action in place that's kind of, that is pre-approved, right? It's already gone through that whole community engagement process and local adoption process. And so I think the hope is that that would be utilized for any actions that are already pre-flagged as maybe being uncertain in terms of ability to move forward. And then it's only for any action that didn't pursue either the primary action or the alternate at the midpoint that there would be a request for adjustment. And I also heard you use the word notice, and I just want to offer in terms of these like points of switching that it would be a request. And I think that, you know, if there isn't, if the reasoning isn't quite tracking, or there's a trend or something involved that seems concerning, then the request doesn't have to necessarily be approved. But I just wanted to parse out those two pieces.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Celestina. Mary Kyle?
Thanks, that was really helpful, again, in kind of the processing. So as I understand, there's actions that will be adopted, some of which may have alternative actions also already adopted if the action isn't pursued or doesn't pan out for some reason. And then there's exploratory work. So there's like 3 different things. Is there a check-in on the exploratory work at any point, like at the midpoint? Or is it just at the end? How is that checked in on? Or maybe it's built into what's adopted in the HPS, in the, what a city adopts on day 1, that has actions, alternative actions, and exploratory work. And maybe it's just that timeline for each exploratory work, because it's going to be pretty different. I would think there might be built into them. Just wondering how that's checked in on.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Celestina, jump in.
It's a good question on the front end, and then Thea jump in on the back end as needed. On the front end, the way that the exploratory work is written in is that it's not part of the compliance of the program. You don't have to have exploratory work in your HPS. If you want to include it as kind of a work planning tool almost, or like just coalescing community around these research projects that you want to do, you're welcome to kind of include that as isolated, exploratory work. If it's not associated with an action, then it's not an integral piece of the HPS and wouldn't be tracked.
Okay.
If it's just exploratory, if it's exploratory work that's in pursuit of an action that is part of that material part of the HPS, then of course that would be the fallback.
Okay, thanks, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anita?
Hi, thanks. There's a question from Shane about the accountability process. So she said if the city or region is flagged because it hasn't reached the needed goals, is that something that's is the public aware of it, or is this an internal process? And also, is it included on the dashboard?
Thanks. Thea?
So it's not included on the dashboard, but there is absolutely there's a public noticing requirement. And there's also a special call out to any community members or interested parties who are engaged during the process of developing the HPS. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Thea.
Yep, thank you. Brock?
A little tangentially related, but for Rule 215, which is the review of the housing production strategies, between the draft 2 and draft 3, it looks like sections 7 through 9 were omitted. Maybe, I don't know if there was like a copy paste error or something like that. There are references to that rule later on. For example, Rule 325, section 11. It says 210, but I think it's supposed to say 215 there, sub 9. So it does reference it. It just seems like it got left out. I just wanted to make sure that that was an error and not a decision to remove those pieces there.
That might, DLC, it might be some just-in-time homework if you don't have that right in front of you, but it's a good call out, Brock, if the rules are referencing spaces that have either been omitted by intention or omitted accidentally. Let's make sure that the references are crosswalked. Thea?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Brock. We'll compare our documents and sort of do a crosswalk there. But I also want to say thank you for your careful reading of the numbering, because these details are hard to track, especially when they're moving around. So Brock and anybody else who feels like, getting in there, we welcome any of these flags.
Thank you. So before we move into the next section, that's going to be focused on some of the obligations and opportunities around engagement. I guess for local cities, reps in particular, right? We've been fundamentally talking about this kind of balancing between the work that can happen and some of the capacity at the local level, which has been a theme through a lot of our conversations. I guess I'm curious if what you're hearing or what you're seeing in the rules is let you take a breath, or I don't know how to describe it. Like, how are you feeling around kind of the capacity conversation that I think DLCD has been trying to be really responsive to with providing some of these, right, whether it's guidance, actions, alternatives, right, pre-approvals, et cetera. I guess I want to just open it up for local practitioners if there's any thoughts coming up to you right now. The DLCD just solved all the local jurisdictional issues, and never again will there be any complaining about capacity. What you're asking, I'm just kidding. Okay, well, for the folks that are kind of in those, yeah, Marty.
I think Alexandra wants to say a few words, but I'm not, you might be speaking, but I'm not hearing. So I just want to take a moment to pause and make space for Alexandra. Tech issues on a Monday. Normal.
Okay.
Needed.
I'm not seeing it. Oh, you are talking. I can see you talking, but we can't hear you.
You could put it in the chat as well, Alexandra.
No. I wish I was a better lip reader. I would lip read. So we might have to use chat, Alexandra. So if you want to throw it in there, and then we can make sure we come to that. I'm going to keep us moving, and again, we'll have a little bit of space at the end for kind of broader open comments. So if things do come up for folks, certainly bring them back in. But let's move to the conversation around engagement.
Okay, everyone. So this is the last topic area that I'll present, and it's around engagement. We've had the HPS program is really built on community engagement. There's places where the rules talk about community engagement. And we've heard, and this is all around just the feedback of ensuring that the most affected by housing policies have a voice in the decision-making process, just as a critical piece in working towards and achieving a critical piece in equitable process, but also a piece in working towards achieving fair and equitable housing outcomes, which is the goal of the HPS program. So the engagement is a cornerstone for both the contextualized housing need and the housing production strategy. We've had lots of discussion in this advisory committee and others about the importance of meaningful engagement. We even heard Shane make a note I wrote, folks in our focus group don't get tapped in, but they have real needs that need to be understood and held and acted upon. It's not just about, we've talked about engagement not being a checkbox, more about fostering trust and gathering local insights and ensuring that people really are at the center of them. And so there's flexibility in the rule in terms of engagement as part of the contextualized housing need. The way that the rule is structured is if cities have recent engagement from recent housing planning efforts that have really good feedback that could help support the contextualization component of trying to understand housing needs, that first step that I noted earlier, then by all means, please use it. If that's not available, then there is also an engagement that could be done if needed to further understand the needs. Then the rules So there's flexibility in the contextualized housing need. Then the rules are a little bit different when it comes to the housing production strategy action plan piece in terms of we've introduced a requirement for engagement on the selection of actions that cities choose in an HPS. But as always, there's trade-offs here, right? On the one hand, we want deep, ongoing engagement that meaningfully influences decision making. And then on the other hand, as the theme we've been kind of bringing forward and wanting to be sensitive and responsive to, because as the implementers of this work, cities, it is something that we need to really grapple with, and that's cities and local governments face resource and capacity constraints. So we've also heard a risk of engagement fatigue. That came up a couple or a few times it might have been in this advisory committee, but definitely in the NAPTAC. And you know, it's a very real reality. So with that, let's discuss where in terms of how do we find the right balance? Are we at the right balance in terms of engagement? Do the draft rules for engagement ensure that it's robust and impactful, while keeping the process manageable for local governments and communities alike? What might we need to adjust or refine to better align with both participation, ooh, Monday, or
Yeah.
or English for me, and capacity needs? So with that, please weigh in here and help us get a read. Like, do you all feel we've nailed it in terms of engagement, or could we modify? This is the time to kind of lean in here and get your direction on this work. So back to you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. Just a couple notes. So Brock, I'll just acknowledge that there was something got dropped, so there's some work to do. So good call out. DLCD will follow out and do that line by line. And then Alexandra just pulling up just shared with me in the chat just around the really appreciating the attempt to continue balance and recognizing for local jurisdictions. This is not the only set of policies and rules that are making asks on folks' time, energy, and capacity. And so, finding the balance here, and I guess presumably finding the balance in many other spaces within state governance will be an ongoing importance. So I'll put that in the chat for everyone. So opening it up, and again, I'm going to maybe push that we start with our community advocates. I mean, again, this has been one of those things around finding, and we've had a lot of conversations around how do you kind of redistribute the power and decision-making influence of communities that are most impacted by housing inequities. How does that show up? How do you find that balance of being able to inform and not being overburdened, all the things that Monty just laid out. So I will kind of push our folks that are representing kind of community advocacy, community voices. What's your perspective on this kind of balance between the expectations for engagement, the impacts of engagement, while also acknowledging both the capacity of jurisdictions and the capacity of community to hold that balance? Yeah, Shane, jump in.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was just waiting for my video. So, yeah, so I would say first and foremost, it's kind of a shout out and a form of appreciation just to verbalize in the process of me doing the focus group. It is my lived experiences. It is also people I care about, and it's people I don't know, but who I identify with, right? In the entire process, I felt held, honored, respected, and transparently communicated with DLCD staff. They supported me in this process. And that's just a shout out that if anyone in cities or municipalities, I guess this is less about resources and more, there is a genuine drive and a form of reciprocity for any community advocates who, if you do have the bandwidth, the focus group was a really good process for me as well. And then in terms of not just a shout out, but then I guess an importance is that even for me, I've been working on this stuff for 10 years, but it's every single day that I have to live with the consequences of actions I never did and to witness how it unfairly impacts people very deeply close to me, mixed with losing my community by displacement. So I'm certain everyone here is empathic and understanding. I just really, really highlight there needs to be prep work and aftercare when you engage community advocates, especially those with lived experiences, and engaging people with limited resources. And literally $50 to $100 for an hour meeting for a lot of people I know, that will be like, that's good incentive. We will be there, we will show up, we will do it. Most of the people that I interact with just do not have the luxury to do these things for free, especially when there is an emotional cost and a time cost. And so I just want to make certain to frame that for anyone who is interested in the process.
Thanks for that, Shane. And I think speaking to the level of investment that's necessary to break down barriers to be able to hear from the folks that you've engaged and have reflected so well in this process feels really important. Shannon, and then Anne.
I think that this organization has just done a great job of modeling how to go about things in terms of finding a trusted community stakeholder who helps to recruit participants, right? Who are in turn going to be compensated for their time. I think that for so many, I can even say some of my affordable housing colleagues, right? We're invited to come to so many tables. And then it's like, is this the one that's going to count? Right? Is this the one that's going to count? And you kind of need for someone you trust to say, like, this is it. This is the one, right? Because how do you know otherwise? And there's in a wonderful sense, no lack of invitations, right? But also there's this having participated and not felt like maybe it moved forward. So just saying, I think that was modeled very well here. Thanks.
Shannon. Anne.
Thank you. I also want to thank Shane for that helpful information. And I have questions also about like timing for meeting people who are maybe lower income, single parents, and platforms, whether it's in person or virtual, and just being more expansive about the abilities, the times, the platforms. We have had trouble in engaging people who are lower income, and oftentimes I think the money is a good incentive for sure, but I also think that lower income jobs often are less flexible in terms of times that people can take off, or abilities for people to travel to an in-person appointment. So I wondered if there was any more input on that sort of thing.
So maybe I'll ask a couple follow-ups. So one, there's a kind of process around like, is there guidance from DLCD around kind of best practices? And I think we have some experts in the room who might be able to offer some insights into how do you effectively engage folks, meeting their needs and meeting them where they're at. But Ethan, you're off mute, jump in.
Well, Ben, I was just going to hand this off to Anita and maybe to talk briefly about the equitable engagement toolkit that DLCD is crafting with Anita. So
tee it right up. Yes, Anita.
Sure. Thanks, Ben and Ethan. So I've been working with the team and we're developing an equitable engagement toolkit. So it's meant to cover, at the minimum, the CFEC rules, but also the ONA rules as well. So it's the engagement. There is some technical kind of strategies on doing some of the analysis on benefit and burdens, looking at kind of GIS tool to do some work as well. And then we've got a number of worksheets that we've developed as well to kind of work through kind of a comprehensive way to approach that. We've created a fast track for small communities with small budgets and short time frames. But also we've mentioned some strategies as well as far as engagement, how to do engagement. I think, and you said about funding folks. Shane mentioned that as well, finding the right times to do that, going to places where people already are, and kind of just looking at it from a standpoint of doing this analysis too. We've had a strategy of doing a community power analysis and looking at the folks who are most impacted with the least amount of influence. Not meaning you don't do engagement with other folks, in particular the decision makers, but there's different strategies to really think about your time and budget as well. So this is going to be coming out near the end of the year. We're going to be providing some training sessions, and DLCD will have that available probably by early next year. We're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks for that
Anita?
question. Oh, Ethan, sorry.
I was just wondering, would it be safe to characterize that toolkit as a suite of best practices, but also an actionable set, like how a jurisdiction and any entity might do engagement in a way that's going to fulfill some of those requirements. So it's like how you might fulfill these requirements, but then also like all of the resources that cities might be interested in using, or like maybe not all of them, but a good set of resources that cities might be able to use. Is that a fair characterization?
It is. There's a lot in there. So yes.
And so thank you for that. So let's go, Julia, and then I guess, if there's others that just want to offer any reflections before we move to the next section, based on Anne's question, because I do think Shane offered some insights around being kind of a trusted partner, leveraging and navigating relationships, shared experiences, right? That piece around compensation, right? So seeking to knock down some of the barriers that might prevent folks. But if folks have other ideas just for today, that would be great. Julia, jump in.
Yeah, thanks. First, I just wanted to acknowledge the shift to acknowledge other engagement work that has been completed. I think that's really a good move. As someone that has done a lot of engagement in the past as an affordable housing developer, just want to again reiterate the fatigue that can happen with ongoing engagement of the same communities over and over and over again, especially kind of to Shannon's point as well, if it feels like you're just saying the same thing and nothing is happening. And so it's kind of nice to just have that, I don't know, acknowledgement of capacity, the trauma that can re-traumatization that can occur through engagement processes, things like that. So that's great. Appreciate that. Also, on more of a kind of technical side of the process, and this might be a little bit for Anita, I was just wanted to encourage, if it's not already happening, engagement with the engagement consultants that are often the ones doing this work for HPS processes. I just kind of as a informal set of feedback that I've heard through some of those processes, I think there's just kind of a little bit of a reality check that might need to occur at the state around the amount of time that needs to be committed to really good engagement processes, and then associated with that, the budgets that get provided for that. And so just kind of want to flag that the cities obviously are engaged in a lot of this engagement process, but I also know that there's a lot of consultants that are a part of this as well. And so just hoping that they're getting to kind of weigh in on their lived experiences in terms of conducting this, and getting paid to do the work too, so that it's done well.
Yeah, and that's maybe a good segue, Anita. I think one of the comments that's come in.
Yeah, real quick, there's one comment from Mercedes about how they've started partnering with some local governments differently. Instead of hiring a consultants, they're hiring organizations, culturally based organizations to co-host events. So skipping the consultant piece. And also that it's a single plan with multiple opportunities. It makes it easier to build on where there's already tables set, where the government partner is a guest as well. And then community engagement should start early with the understanding the current state, review the data has been collected and also the decisions, not just the end check assumptions or to validate decisions already underway. So yeah, I think that's really a great opportunity to think about it. And I think just Shane's point you all heard is really a lot of it is it's not the number and amount of folks you engage with, but it's the kind of relationship and depth, as Shane had talked about in particular, of how you engage with folks and building that trust and being heard and feeling safe. So there's a lot of this kind of strategy as well. It's just not checking a box that you've got 10 different languages, check, check, check. That's not necessarily the best way to go about it. So this toolkit has some other strategies and ways to think about doing that, even as a small organization, and also maybe a lot of engagement fatigue with a lot of folks. There's other ways to really bring them in and give them the opportunity to really help make some change.
Yeah, that's great, Anita. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this piece? I know we have another section to move through, but any additional pieces? I think we've heard a lot of themes, of course, that have gone through around kind of how do you know, not just implement best practices, but how do you avoid the type of stumbles that rely on the same folks all the time over and over again? How do you go to the same organizations over and over again? How do you make sure there's time and resource to sustain longer term relationships and not be so transactional? So a number of themes that have emerged, and then of course the work Anita, that you're doing with the LCD will help support and provide some guidance and best practices for folks. But any last thoughts or any reflections? I know, Anne, you put out a broader question. Just, I know we have a lot of folks that do on the ground work. If there's anything else you want to add before we move on, love to just create that space.
Thank you. I think this was pretty well answered. I mean, I am interested in a broad range of participation, though, so I'm sure Anita's looking at that, but yeah, just want to dive deep and get the right representation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and then Anita, I don't, you put it to everyone, but you engage the engagement folks as you're doing the work and really bringing in a larger set of voices. So it's not kind of a one consultant mind, but many minds contributing to the work. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Let's move to our last conversation. Thea, I think you're going to lead us off. And again, one of the themes that we've been already talking about kind of around city capacity to be able to do the work. But jump in, Thea.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I guess just to frame this out a little bit, I want to say that in developing, particularly the acceleration program, we heard significant concern from local governments about the strain on city capacity, and also how to evaluate what is actually within a city's control when conducting an audit and developing an acceleration agreement. What is in there and what has been in the rules since version 1 is kind of a 3-part test where DLCD looks at, is the problem within the city's jurisdiction? Does the city currently have capacity and resources to address it? And finally, does DLCD have the capacity and resources to support the city in addressing it? So that's sort of where it stands now. We have heard from several local governments that this is sort of a satisfactory approach to what could be a really complicated analysis to actually tease out what falls within a city's control and what doesn't. But we wanted to bring it back here at least one more time because we know it's really important, and we want to sort of yeah, put it to all your smart policy brains if this is the right way to do this, if you can think of another way to do this, and also if there are other places in the rules where we can think about supporting city capacity in different ways. So just to sort of put it out there broadly, and then you and I can work on refining questions. But I hope people have some feedback here. It would be helpful for us at this stage.
Well, certainly for folks that are representing cities, this is a great moment to kind of hear kind of at a kind of high level, right? How we've tried to strike this balance in DLCD's work and crafting these rules to try to ensure that there's real capacity expectations and some responsiveness to what folks have raised before. So maybe this is a little bit of a temperature check and maybe an opportunity to offer where you're still seeing or things that are making you nervous or concerned around being able to have the capacity to be able to do this work in the spirit of all that we've talked about and the spirit of what Diona is trying to achieve. So I think for particularly our city reps, love to start with you and then see if there's other thoughts from folks.
Sean, we nailed it.
Brian, don't speak too soon. Yeah, well, Brian, start us off, please. You're on mute. You're on mute, Brian. Brian.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. It's a lot coming into this meeting. I recall the last meeting when we were sitting as small groups and then larger groups, talking about kind of the overall level of satisfaction with the rules. So were we like really good to go, top notch, let's move towards adoption, or do these rules need more work? And my recollection was, I think kind of across the board, folks wanted more work on the rules. We also recognize there's an adoption deadline. So here we are. I think there's a lot of silence today. I'm going to suspect there's a lot of silence from cities. I won't put them on the hook, but I will say this. There are a lot of concerns with these rules. I want to do all this work. Personally, here at the City of Bend, we want to do this work. But I think there are gaps in data sets that are available to us. There may be gaps in relationships. And then just the amount of resourcing required to do an entirely new procedural step before doing the other procedural steps that were difficult enough has been added to the plates of cities. And so I believe that the thrust of the rules are fantastic and we should and need to do this work. I also believe at the same time, cities don't have the resources to do this work. And I feel blessed to be here at City of Bend, where I have a small team of planners, 4 people, right? And we're doing all the things, CFEC compliance and all the stuff that you have to do and TSP updates and moving towards a big adoption of housing work and transportation planning, urban growth boundary expansions, considering all of this. And I look at these rules and I think that's a heck of a lot of resources. It will compete with other elements of our work plan. And I do not believe that with current funding streams, and this is really up to the legislature, but it's also up to the agency to advocate very strongly for the needed resources to do this work and to do it well. So I just didn't want to let the opportunity fly by because there's a lot of silence. Silence in this case, I don't know if silence is approval of the structure of the rules, the requirements of the rules. And so I will just speak from my standpoint that I'm concerned. I want to do the work. I want to do it well. We need the financial resources. And in previous rulemaking efforts from the states, we do not see the commensurate financial support with new legal requirements. So I'm concerned, but I'm happy to see, I'd be really happy if DLCD and the legislature really get as proactive in their funding as they are in their rulemaking. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm gonna, DLC, I'm gonna ask y'all to maybe hold, because I think that, Brian, maybe you've opened up the door for some of your colleagues to also speak to like this, ask of relationships, data, the resources and competing and other obligations. Alexandra, I know you named some of that earlier. Let's see if we can hear you.
I've unplugged from my main
Hey, there you
system.
are.
Okay. I need to make another call to IT. We're still, in my first month on the job here at LOC, so a little bit of patience. But just really wanted to kind of underline what we heard from Brian. I think I would not take the silence as, it's perfect, it's right. I think there is a lot of exhaustion on the part of our members and cities in general, just kind of, there are a lot of competing priorities right now with rulemaking and with kind of draws on city resources and capacity that are overlapping. And so while, we appreciate kind of attempts and consolidation and alternate paths that are draws or lesser draws on capacity, it's still a huge undertaking and a huge task. And we're asking a lot of our cities without kind of commensurate funding and capacity building within them to allow them to do this work. This is not work that they don't want to engage in. I really do want to underline that this is important work, and I think we all recognize that. But that, this is a lot, and especially for, our smaller cities and kind of mid-sized cities, this is maybe not something that they always have capacity for. And, between this and CFAC, we've given a lot of feedback, and, I'm still working on kind of gathering all of the information and all of that to be able to engage in this properly and kind of, I think that's the same for a lot of our cities where this is a lot and, it's not necessarily something they always have, the most capacity for. It's something that they need to do, but it is a huge drain on capacity.
Yeah, thanks, Alexandra. Alyssa?
Thank you. And I will agree with what was said before me. And I just want to tease out a little bit. Like throughout this whole process, I always say like clear rules have to go with robust tools. And I think really the department recognizes that and has really shown already up to this point in providing technical assistance to small jurisdictions to help be able to get ready to do work and start taking little bites of the bigger apple. And so I do think that what that shows to me is that there's kind of different types of capacity that I want to tease out a little bit. And there is the technical planning capacity where I do think there are tools that the department has that can be aligned with the expectations. And that frankly, we are still going to struggle, but that doesn't mean, like Brian said, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it or it shouldn't be asked of us. It just means that we're going to need capacity built to go from where we are now to where we all are trying to go, right? This is a forward-looking thing of not doing the same thing that we used to do that got us into this problem in the first place, but being proactive about solving it. And so on the technical side, I think there's a very specific way to wrap around the right assistance. We were talking about engagement consultants. We out here are working with technical consultants who work with a lot of cities and have a lot of knowledge and start getting the lay of the land of our area, and would be good to continue to have a through line of helping the jurisdictions use consulting resources on the technical level. I think the engagement question spoke to the community capacity question. And I think as you're asking us to have conversations about affirmatively furthering for housing and contextualized housing needs, that there's also communities where that capacity will need to be built from what it is to where we are trying to go. And that's probably a different set of tools and resources that are needed. And then I just want to throw out political capacity, because I think, especially in different jurisdictions, there's different approaches to sort of getting stakeholders on board to get to the yeses we need, to make the choices we need, to start heading in the direction that will do something differently than what we've done before. And I think they all fit together, but I don't know that the state is the right place to provide the political capacity. But I think if we don't marry the technical, the community, and the political capacity, we will there will be some gaps in whatever approach we use. And so I think we want to solve for each of these different threads of capacity in different ways. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for just kind of adding another layer around the political capacity. I don't think it's come up as frequently. Tara, jump in.
Yeah, I really appreciate Brian sort of giving us this overarching perspective, and then it being broken down a little bit further just now. I think the way I've been thinking about it is throughout this process, we've done a really good job of sort of chipping away at the biggest challenges to try and get this work that we need to do to get within the realm of feasible for cities. I think when we started, it really didn't feel feasible at all. And so we've been trying to like clarify and figure out what resources we need and have better understanding. So it is something that we can actually achieve and understand. It would not be accurate though, I think, to say that it seems it's within cities' resources yet. So understanding those resources is going to be an ongoing process, and I know I've been pretty vocal about, okay, we need support and it's just not to do the HPS, but in order to evaluate tools, that's just one good example. Building political capacity is a really great another example that was just put forward. So yeah, I do think sometimes like you get a little, or I get a little bit of like, kind of like a deer in headlights with like how big this is, right? When you ask a big question, like, hey, is this well balanced? Well, no, it's not well balanced, but we're trying to figure out how to do it. And so I don't know, maybe just bear that in mind, like, and have these really detailed conversations. I keep going back to like Gresham is a larger city and we don't have a housing planner, right? Like you really need a staff to follow all the state updates and the technical requirements to even understand what you're supposed to start to do and how it overlaps with CPEC and how it overlaps with their local priorities. But I'm going to venture to say that most cities don't even have a housing planner because we don't in Gresham and we're one of the larger cities. So even just to understand it takes capacity building and a lot of time on the part of a city, especially if you're not going to lean on a consultant. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. Holly, please.
Sure. I can echo what all my colleagues have said. I won't repeat it, but certainly I agree with what's been shared. I do want to share a couple, I guess one really specific comment is I'm really, really concerned about the capacity for the data gathering and some of those conversations about the specificity needed that are being put off till later, which makes it hard to even weigh in on whether it seems like the right thing right now. I, again, understand the rulemaking deadline that we're under, but today we were supposed to have this conversation about the historical practices of discrimination in our communities, and the conversation kind of just dead-ended, and it sounds like it's a 2025 conversation. I'll be frank, I have absolutely no idea where to start gathering that data for our community, and our community being small tends to not have access to some of the data that other places in the state do. And so just trying to flag like that one specific thing, the overall capacity, I share the concern, but one of those pieces is the data gathering and the lack of specificity around where the data can come from, how the data can be gathered, how much of it is the responsibility of the government. Really, I'm kind of looking at this, trying to figure out, I know there's no capacity, but whether I need to make a recommendation to the city to literally hire another planner just to do housing. Which I know there's no capacity to do, but I'm not sure how we can achieve what's being asked right now without that capacity.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. So DLCD, I mean, if there's other folks that want to add, just raise your hand. Part of me wants to ask a question, right? If you all at a local level had the the resources, right, to maintain sustained relationships, to do the data analysis, to, have the capacity to take on other like, do the rules themselves, like, is there a rules issue or is it really a capacity and implementation? Like, if you had the resources you were needing, there's a curiosity of me is like, is this a challenge with the rules, or is this really a challenge with how you implement these rules in the spirit of best practice, based on, the kind of capacity and resource that it takes to do it well. So I don't know if that's even a question that we ask in this space, but that's kind of what I'm hearing, right? It's like we can see the direction that we're going in terms of how the rules are crafted. We can appreciate how we've tried to find some balance and guidance and alternatives and model practices, et cetera. And there's still this underlying and major concern around like what it takes to actually do this, particularly in small places, but also just referencing Terry, your comments around Gresham. So, I guess that's maybe an open question, maybe for today, maybe not, but Anne, why don't you hop in?
Well, I will echo everything that Brian and the others said. I really think this is a huge, very weighty expectation with many parts, between the qualitative stuff that has to be done, and the data inconsistencies, and then the technical work that has to be done. But not only that, it's a legacy project. And so all of that information that has to be very well understood has to be passed along to, new planners as they come in. Some of us are going to retire, others are going to move on to other jobs. This is something that's going to have to live on, and we're going to have to translate it on down the line. So, that's one thing that I'm very concerned about. So I'm not looking just at capacity initially, but capacity to, to keep this thing living and working well. I don't know how other people feel about that. And then my other concern about it is the numbers for us are really big in the methodology draft right now. We are a county. We don't have the potential to draw from other areas to add to our land capacity as we're planning for targets. Cities will be building annexations into their plans over time, taking land from us to meet their own targets. So we have a very large, we have a very large basket to fill in the beginning. That's likely going to be like our routes to addressing the need are going to be diminishing as we lose land. It feels really, really big right now. So, I mean, for the county in particular, we have, a shrinking land mass and a very, very large established need. So we're going to be planning for that need while our capacity goes away. That's difficult. And then just understanding it all and passing it on as that happens. Thanks.
Thanks for all that. And let's go with Alyssa, then David, and then Ethan. I'd love to kind of open it up to you and other DLCD folks, just kind of reflecting back on what you're hearing. So Alyssa and then David.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep the conversation going about like why are we even having a conversation about ONA? And the reason is because we need to produce more housing badly, quickly, urgently, and we need all the tools that we need to bring about in order to accomplish not just more housing, but more housing that serves the people that we haven't been serving. And I've heard DLCD stuff talk about ONA as we're thinking about the outcomes here. We're really thinking about what we want to have happen. And so, again, rules are a great way to set a framework for how to implement good public policy. But I think most of us in this room have seen like good public policy ideas not well implemented. And I think then you end up with the good idea, but the outcomes that you aimed for, you don't achieve, or you achieve unintended outcomes along the way. And frankly, that's the history of urban planning in a lot of ways. And so I think what we're saying here is the rules have to enable the public policy to be well implemented. And when you're talking about this capacity, you want local governments at the end of the day to say, wow, we brought the tools to the table that actually allowed us to overcome the barriers to producing housing that we found in our community. Or we've brought new things to the table that we would have never had the opportunity to bring to the table because this framework has empowered us to. So, rather than thinking of these rules as like, what do we have to do? It's what are these rules going to allow us to accomplish in terms of actually producing housing? And I worry that we are making the rules so structurally over, I don't want to say anything bad, but maybe we're overthinking the rules a lot in the name of trying to get to the outcomes. And so I think I think what lots of us are saying at the local government level is, yeah, we want to get the housing done, but we don't want to trip over all of the things we're going to have to do and all of the analysis we're going to have to conduct. And so I just want us to think again about like, what's the most optimal path to the outcomes? And then to your point, like, do we have a problem with the rules? Well, the rules have to really be well married to the path to implementation, the resources to implementation, the empowerment of local government rather than the restriction of local government. And so I just wanted to pull all the way through to the outcomes again. We're trying to build housing here.
Yeah, really appreciate that. And just centering us in on that starting point of the overall vision. David, jump in, and then Ethan, I want to pass to you.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. So yeah, I just want to as a representative of the small communities here in Tillamook County that are strapped under Senate Bill 406, we're challenged with both political capacity, the will of small communities to really, I mean, I know there's a lot of eagerness to get the intent of this done, but how we're challenged to really get it done. And then second of all, sewer capacity. We have a number of communities in Tillamook County where the sewer plants are basically in the floodplain. And it's going to be a challenge to expand those sewer plants any further because they're in the floodplain. And with the new rules coming out with FEMA and those requirements, we're all strapped for that. So thanks.
No, I appreciate you naming some of those infrastructure issues that exist. Thank you, David. Ethan, offer some reflection for you.
I mean, what a great conversation here. I think this has been, it's so important to make sure, to Alyssa, your point, that we are crafting a program that's actually going to be feasibly implemented, effectively implemented towards those outcomes, right? That we all have defined here and are defined in HB 2001. And I'll just kind of reflect that the capacity issues in local governments, whether it's political or technical or financial, are very real. And I think DLCD is seeing that and, have had lots of conversations in the ONA program and the CFEC program, middle housing and all of those things that, have identified those as truly, truly a barrier. Also note that the ONA estimates a large amount of need in terms of housing over the next 20 years, right? And there's many factors that have led into that, but one of those factors is that we're just underproducing housing, and the expectation through the governor's office, 36,000 units annually. That's nearly double what we're producing as a state now, which identifies that we're going to need a lot more capacity to actually meet those numbers in all forms, right? And also in the ONA is this sense of like shared responsibility, the state and local governments coming together to overcome those challenges, right? And DLCD has, within our abilities has advocated for, matching the technical support that we're able to offer to local governments to the need, right? And that comes in the form of increasing requests for technical assistance for local governments to engage in this planning work and do the actual steps in the process to, lead us towards those outcomes. And then, thinking through dedicating a whole year towards guidance and, dedicating, the rest of the program to providing the support, both from not from a non-monetary or non-financial perspective, but in terms of like true guidance or direction or advice, all of those kind of things. And then lastly, I'll just note that, we're planning a program for the future of Oregon, right? Which may not reflect the way that we've been doing planning for a long time. And so some of it is new, some of it will be challenging, but I think what you're hearing, hopefully what you're hearing from me and the rest of the DLCD team, is that we're committed to helping and assisting local governments overcome those barriers through equitable engagement toolkit with our request for additional funding, and just being here for it, and engaging in those one-off conversations and thinking through where the flexibility lives, and trying to ground that work in each different local government's context, because they're all different, and trying to have those conversations and be flexible in the way that we can be within the framework of this program. So I just wanted to mention that all of those comments are definitely landing, and I think there's obviously a lot more work to do in terms of providing that support to local governments, but I think we're making good progress in the right now so that we can achieve those outcomes in the future.
Thanks. Mary Kyle.
Thanks. I think this is really helpful, and there's advocates here who can also help with this the more we understand the issues. But just so here's one initial idea. There's a lot of talk about the need for cities of all sizes to have data. And I don't know if DLCD has been doing this all along the way, but are you keeping a list of all of the data that's needed to fulfill ONA by a city, and then have running alongside it a commitment of what will be provided by DLCD or other state agencies to cities? It would be really useful to have that, I think. And maybe it exists, but it might ease some anxiety if cities see like, oh, we're going to be getting that from DAS or whomever, more than just the number, or DLCD or whomever. And so that's just one starting thing, I think, and that's a big part of it, the data. And then recognizing where there's gaps, and maybe the first rollout of the HPSs under the full ONA aren't going to have everything filled in, but knowing where the gaps are and how they're going to be filled in. Anyway, that would be very useful for advocates also to understand. And I have other thoughts and other things, but I want to let it percolate for a while. I assume we'll come back to this subject at our next RAC meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Kyle. Ethan.
Yeah, thank you. And it's something I meant to include in my last statement, but to Holly's good point about like, I don't even know where to start collecting this data, or like what tables am I looking at? Is there, I don't even know what's out there, and where do I look? Some of those questions have been thought through, and the housing production dashboard, the equity indicators that are provided by the state, or what we're pointing towards to say, hey, look here, jurisdiction, this is the data that you can use as a baseline. If you have additional data locally, or if you want to bring in those other pieces, that's the whole point of this contextualized housing need. Bring that data that the state provides, ground it in your jurisdiction, think through what gaps exist in this statewide data that I can fill in with the data I'm aware of in my local government. Those are perfect answers to some of those questions about like, I'm just not sure where this data is going to come from and how I do this analysis. Rely on some of the data that's provided, and then fill in the gaps that you might be aware of. And I think another thing to note here is that that's also an area where going back to some of this earlier conversation in this particular meeting about, can a city bring in these other kind of like third-party data sets? And I would say, as we're thinking through the answer to that, a definitive answer to that question, we should probably lean towards the direction of saying, yeah, all of it is good information for the purposes of decision making, and especially the decision making process that we need to undergo here in ONA. And so, yeah, I think the information provided by DAS and OHCS is a really, really good place to start for a lot of this work.
Really helpful. And then Ethan, maybe inappropriately putting you on the spot, I guess, like as folks talk about resources, right? We're going into a legislative session, right? With the 2-year budget. Like, is there, I guess, how is DLCD approaching that? I mean, I think you have potentially a number of voices that would stand right alongside you and ask for resources, right, to be able to implement this in the way through the lens of all of what people said, right? What this requires and the difference between what cities have capacity for now and what they would need to do this well, right? There's a gap there, clearly articulated across the state. So I guess, is there any reflections for this group around kind of what is that conversation of resources? How are folks talking about it perhaps in Salem right now? And are there any opportunities for folks to kind of join you on stage as some of these asks are made?
Yeah, I'll start, and I see Aurora came on camera, so I'll probably hand it off to her. But in terms of how DLCD is trying to match that need for technical assistance, in particular, financial resources for local governments in doing this work, we're, in terms of a policy option package, requesting more technical assistance than we ever have for housing in this upcoming biennium. And I think that's just, I've been through several biennia at this point at DLCD, and the need for technical assistance always outpaces what we have available. And so we would continue to pound the drum of saying, this is a large need. What we've been provided has not been able to match that need in the past, and we will continue that in 25. But Aurora, please.
Yeah, Aurora, jump in.
Yeah, hi everyone. I can just give a little bit of information about the process component of that. As Ethan had mentioned, we included 2 specific policy option package requests related to technical assistance funding for the ONA program as part of our agency request budget that gets submitted in early August. That will go into the governor's recommended budget, which is released on December 1st. And so the governor's office is currently working on sort of looking across the state enterprise at policy option packages that have been submitted, as well as current service level budgets, and sort of balancing that. And so what gets included into the governor's recommended budget may not fully reflect everything that we included in our agency request budget. When the governor's recommended budget gets released on December 1st, or I think it's the 2nd actually, because the 1st is a Sunday, the agency is basically only allowed to advocate for what is included in that package at that point. And so that is what we'll be allowed to go forward and ask for in the legislature during the 2025 session.
All right, thanks for clarity of process and timelines, procedural limitations for advocacy. Okay. This may be a conversation we come back to at RAC 10, just around that broader resource reality, and once folks have had the chance to see kind of what the governor issues. I realize we only got a few minutes left. If folks have any topics of interest they want to put in the chat just to raise, that would be great. Otherwise, maybe we can pull up the slides, talk a little bit about next steps. But before we go there, Anita, you helped kick off this meeting. And Shane's reflections, I guess, if there, I just wanted to create some space for you. If there's any reflections that you want to offer.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And thank you all for the great discussion. I think you all have made a lot of progress. I know there's a lot to do as well once this gets down to the local level, but definitely this conversation has been really rich. So I really appreciate Shane's feedback and presentation and engagement with folks to talk about what it is really like on the ground for folks that, you know, this housing is meant for, that we're all building. So really keeping that in mind. And then just the other work that's going on, both with the COTAC on the benefits and burdens. In particular, the discussion I think that will be good for ongoing is about the past and current discriminatory actions, mapping and analysis, which is a key component as well. I know people are interested in that, and just the capacity at local government and also capacity politically and in community. So really thinking about, would love for this group to be thinking about how to do that where it's building on it and we're not wearing each other out, but also knowing that all of you as planners, there's always something to do. So, you know, CFAC, now it's ONA, it was in the past, it was TSPs, it was like Measure 51, remember those? So anyway, I appreciate your tenacity in this. This is for the long run and such a crisis. So the engagement and the equity component has been really strong for this discussion. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Anita. So Ethan, I wonder if you want to kind of remind folks of the kind of upcoming milestones. We can pull that slide back up and then just close this up as we in our last few minutes here.
Well, yeah, awesome. Yeah, perfect. All right, so you've seen this slide before, but just kind of run through it again. We've got just a little bit over, gosh, what is it? Just a little under 3 weeks until the public hearing at the Land Conservation Development Commission. That'll be, you know, if you were interested in formally putting comments on the record for the rulemaking process, this is the venue to do so. Orally, you can also provide obviously written comments and send those to the DLCD, housing.dlcd at dlcd.oregon.gov email address. You can provide those comments all the way up to November 14th. And again, you'll have an opportunity, or we will have an opportunity to meet as a rulemaking advisory committee on November 6th for our last chance to discuss as a group before the rules go to commission for adoption in early December. Like we mentioned throughout this meeting, the work always will continue, and we'll really turn our heads in December towards the capacity and urbanization work, and obviously filling in those gaps on adoption ready actions moving forward. So there's opportunity to bring those things back and think through the opportunities that are present there. But in terms of closing, I really appreciate the conversation today and all of the conversation, not only in this group, but also the technical advisory committees. And I think I can speak for the rest of the DLCD team that those have been really quite impactful for how these rules are shaping up. And really this is, while DLCD will make a recommendation to LCDC to adopt, I think the Rulemaking Advisory Committee can also share in some of that celebration in getting to that point. So just a note of appreciation, and I will see you all very, very soon.
So, well, thank you for that. We are 12 o'clock on the dot. Nice work. Much love, everybody. Appreciate you, and we'll see you the next time. Take care.